if we talk about fatty liver, we'd have to say that syndrome X is the most common cause of fatty liver. It's not alcohol. People think, how did I get a fatty liver? And the doctor will often say, well, you've got to stop drinking.
Exactly.
But, doctor, I don't drink. Well,
Yep.
how did you get a fatty liver?
Yes, exactly.
So how does that occur?
Well, most people think that they're never going to get a liver problem unless they drink alcohol. That they just they can't imagine that in fact sugar can cause just as much harm to your liver as alcohol does. So
Yes.
people are often quite shocked when they get a bad blood test result, and the first thing their doctor often thinks is that they drink, but often they don't. And so now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is what's so common.
Yes, indeed, it's the most common cause of liver transplant, fatty liver disease. But the good news is you can reverse it. Yeah, so, your liver can take a lot of punishing. So we have done a clinic on fatty liver disease and found that you can reverse it through a combination of low carbohydrate diet, superfoods for the liver and a good liver formula. And we've had thousands of patients in whom we've reversed fatty liver. So it's one of those things that you don't have to put up with. It doesn't have to become a disease. And it's interesting to know that the high levels of insulin is the imbalance that's telling your body to store the fat in the liver, isn't it?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so syndrome X. And how would you best describe this syndrome X? Because, it is an epidemic, syndrome X, and I don't think people really understand it. They see the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. I'm overweight, I'm tired, I'm craving sugar, I've got a bit of cholesterol, I'm getting old. This is syndrome X, it's inevitable. And we treat the symptoms. We give people drugs to lower their insulin, to lower their blood sugar. But how would you best describe it so people can understand this hidden epidemic?
So there are blood tests you can get done for syndrome X. You can get an insulin test, a blood sugar test, triglyceride test. Your blood pressure will often be high. But just by looking at a person, if they have a big waist, if they carry weight around their torso, they're bound to have some degree of syndrome X.
Yes.
If they have a relative with type 2 diabetes, they're far more likely to have syndrome X. And syndrome X is often called metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance or pre-diabetes. They're all different terms for the same thing.
Yes.
And so basically people with syndrome X produce more insulin than they should. And whenever any of us eat carbohydrate-rich foods like sugar or flour or grains, cereals, starchy stuff basically, whenever we eat any of that, we digest it into glucose. So our blood sugar goes up. And when your blood sugar goes up, your pancreas releases insulin in order to get that sugar into your cells where you can use it for energy. But people with syndrome X, their insulin doesn't work as well. So to compensate, they produce more insulin. And it still doesn't work brilliantly. So those people aren't able to burn sugar for energy like they should, and instead they turn a lot of that sugar into fat and store it either in their liver and get a fatty liver or as body fat deposits. And so because they're not burning the sugar properly, they're often still tired, they're still hungry, they tend to be hungry people, and they crave sugar.
Mm. Well, insulin is a powerful fat-storing hormone. It makes you hungry, ravenous indeed, and it also suppresses the production of fat-burning hormones in your body.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So your fat-burning hormones won't work as well. Even if you do a lot of exercise, if you've got high insulin levels, you're not really going to lose much weight.
Yes. You have to get the insulin down to go
Exactly.
into the fat-burning zone, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. And most people with syndrome X don't even realise their insulin's high.
No, most
Yeah.
doctors wouldn't even test it, and most people are unaware of that.
No. Doctors don't test it because it can be expensive and the health insurance system of that particular country can't afford to pay for it all, and also it's a bit of a sensitive test. But generally speaking, when you look at this graph and you see the insulin going up, insulin levels should never go above 80 during a glucose tolerance test. But in people who have very significant insulin resistance, they'll go up to 200, 300, 400. They go through the roof. and they stay elevated. And while ever your insulin levels are high, you will not go into the fat burning zone. So that is the key, to get the insulin down. If you don't get your insulin working, what can it lead to, Margaret?
Well, apart from fatty liver, apart from a much greater risk of fatty liver, a bigger risk of type 2 diabetes. And most diabetics get heart attacks or strokes eventually.
Yes. So we can use drugs to lower insulin. Now, there are some very effective drugs, such as metformin, but there are also some very good supplements that you can take. Magnesium, how does that help to get your insulin working better?
So magnesium improves insulin sensitivity. So it makes the insulin that's already in your body more effective, so therefore you don't need to secrete as much. So over time, your insulin level will come down. Magnesium also helps make people more calm and relaxed and helps them to sleep better, and therefore makes their life easier. And so it's so much easier to stick to a diet when you feel calm and relaxed and you've slept well.
What about chromium?
So chromium is a mineral that a lot of people don't get enough of, and chromium helps to keep your blood sugar level stable throughout the day. So you're far less likely to get a crash in blood sugar, which can leave you really hungry, give you cravings, it can make you sleepy, it can make you irritable. Sort of generally those afternoon sugar cravings can be a symptom of chromium deficiency. Yes. So chromium keeps your blood sugar more stable and even throughout the day, so makes it a lot easier to stick with a healthy diet.
I think so. And also there's various herbs you can use, like gymnema. That's a wonderful herb for helping blood sugar. Gymnema sylvestre.
Yes.
They're funny names, aren't they? And bitter melon, it's a wonderful herb.
Absolutely.
And you can eat that, you can grow that. One of the naturopaths I work with, she grows bitter melon and eats it. I frankly don't like the taste, but I take a supplement, bitter. You know, with the gymnema and bitter melon and chromium. And I give it to a lot of my patients, and it's just magic. Because they say, wow, when I take these supplements to get my insulin working better, my cravings go.
Exactly.
You can't believe it.
Exactly. They really appreciate that.
Yeah, so bringing your insulin down and your blood sugar just a little bit and stabilising it can kill your cravings. What a relief. And what kind of eating plan would you recommend, Margaret, for people who have high insulin levels?
Well, it's important to eat protein regularly, so protein at every meal, because protein helps you feel full and satisfied, and protein doesn't cause you to secrete insulin, and so helps to keep your blood sugar stable throughout the day. So good sources of protein are things like eggs, fish, poultry, red meat. Whey protein powder is a really good source of protein as well. So any of those, as long as you have one of those at each meal, with some vegetables, is ideal.
You know, a lot of people say to me, oh, I thought too much protein was bad for my liver and bad for my kidneys because it makes you acidic. So what do you say to those people who are worried about it?
Yeah, well, it's not a high protein diet that we put people on. It's really an adequate protein diet.
Yes.
So whereas in the past they may have had 2 eggs on toast for breakfast, we ask them to have 2 eggs on a plate and have some vegetables for breakfast.
Yes.
And for lunch they may have had tuna in a sandwich. Well, we ask them to have that tuna with vegetables. So really it's a high vegetable diet.
Yes.
And that can only be a good thing, surely.
Research has shown that diets don't work. And this is because they don't really balance your appetite hormones.
That's right.
Yeah, the key is balancing the appetite hormones. We've talked about one of them, which is insulin, but there's some other ones that are really interesting that are newly discovered. You see, Syndrome X was discovered in 1988 by Professor Gerald Reeveson. He called it Syndrome X because nobody recognised it. X for unknown. He said, wow, you know, I've found the holy grail of weight loss. And I think he probably followed on the footsteps of Atkins in a way that, you know, they both thought the same way, that carbohydrate was the main enemy here for people who were overweight. And I agree with them. But then, about 10 years later, we had these other hormones being identified in research, And the ones that I find interesting are leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hormone produced in the stomach, and it's secreted when your stomach's empty, and it makes you hungry straight away.
Exactly.
And something that's really interesting is that new sleeve surgery, the gastrectomy where they remove part of your stomach, a sleeve gastrectomy, they're actually removing the part of the stomach that makes the ghrelin. And I spoke to someone recently who had just had that operation, sleeve gastrectomy. He lost a huge amount of weight, 40 kilograms or something. And he said to me, I never feel hungry, Sandra. I never feel hungry. I said, oh, I think I'd miss that feeling of hunger. But then, I don't have a weight problem, so it's easy for me to say. He said, yes. He says, someone has to tell me it's lunchtime, or I have to tell myself I better eat. You better eat, otherwise you'll waste away. I thought, that really is strange, but it had worked. So ghrelin from the stomach is obviously important, but the other hormone, leptin, which is produced in our fat, is important too.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how do we need to balance that? We've talked about protein and insulin, but what about leptin?
So leptin is a hormone that's made in a few places in your body, but mainly in your fat cells, and it travels to your brain to tell you you've had enough to eat and to suppress hunger. So based on how much fat you have on your body, if you've got a lot of fat, you'll make a lot of leptin, which travels to your brain and says, there's enough fat on my body, I don't need to eat anymore. So that's the theory, which sounds good, sounds like it would work. Unfortunately, in people who have been overweight for a long time, their leptin doesn't work as well. Their brain has stopped listening to it. So they've got a lot of body fat, they're producing a lot of leptin, which is travelling to the brain and trying to say, stop eating, I don't need any more food, but they've developed leptin resistance. Their leptin has been so high for so long that their brain is ignoring it now.
Yes. So, yeah, that's right. The leptin's knocking on the door, but the door's not being opened.
No.
It's not having any effect. And I've read some research that said that healthy fat is important for reversing that leptin resistance, and that, when people have been on a low carbohydrate, low fat, low calorie diet, that because they've been having too much carbohydrate to compensate, the resistance becomes very bad. So what kind of fats can we have in our diet to reverse that leptin resistance?
Yes, people don't realise that food has a hormonal effect on you. So people often think that their hormones are responsible for their inability to lose weight, and that's true. But it's the foods you eat which then affect your hormone levels. And so carbohydrate and sugar produces all of the wrong hormones, and protein and good fats will help you produce all the right hormones to make you less hungry and to make it easier to lose weight. So ideally, the good fats that you'd be eating would be omega-3 fats from seafood, and you may even need an omega-3 fat supplement, such as a fish oil supplement, because it's really hard to get enough omega-3 just through diet.
Yes.
And monounsaturated fat is really good for your hormone levels and ability to lose weight, such as found in extra virgin olive oil, avocados, macadamia nuts. And we also recommend that you have some saturated fat, which is actually really good for you. It's often high in vitamin D and vitamin A. Foods that contain saturated fat often have those nutrients with them. So good healthy sources of saturated fat are things like organic coconut oil. Butter can be really good for you, depending on what the cow ate. If the cow ate grass as opposed to grains, then the butter is quite good for you. And even meat, red meat, lamb. So any grass-fed or pasture-fed meat is a really healthy source of fat as well.
Yes, so lamb or veal.
Yep.
Seafood is wonderful. Also flaxseed. I like flaxseed, but I don't really like the oil per se. I like to grind my own fresh flaxseed, and that gives me some omega-3 as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So, fat is important. Your brain is made of fat. there's a lot of cholesterol in your brain, and cholesterol is very important for protecting your brain, for insulating your brain. And there's nothing wrong with eating it. If you eat cholesterol, your liver will stop making it. So that's the process of homeostasis, where everything stays the same. Everything is self-regulating. And, you know, if you look at unprocessed food, it's generally got fat in it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and fat makes you full and satisfied. It makes a meal taste better. It helps you absorb the nutrients from your meal. And eating enough good fats and protein is the best way to stop craving sugar.
Yeah, and to balance this leptin, you know, this naughty little leptin to which we become resistant. So if the leptin starts working, our hunger won't be nearly as excessive.